Welcome to the Soul Grit Podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Hi, welcome back to the Soul Grit Podcast. This is Ann. I'm here today with Kate Purvis. Hi, Kate.
Hey, Ann.
Now, let me tell you a little bit about Kate. We just met. We're new friends. We're having a good conversation here before we hit record. And Kate is a mom who lives in Mississippi. And she has a ministry towards people who are experiencing miscarriage. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about that because she actually started out as a doula, but had her own story of loss. And now she's here to share some of her story so that people who are experiencing this kind of loss can learn how to heal, learn how to turn to God in their feelings, feel all their feelings, and then to learn how to move forward. So before we get going on this conversation, let me just give you the warning that we are talking about pregnancy loss in this episode. And so if that's something that's sensitive for you and you would like to skip this or come back at a later time, here's your chance to do that. So Kate, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your story?
Sure. So I am a mom. I have 5 kids. My youngest is almost 2, and our oldest, we actually brought home from Ukraine a year ago. She's 19. And in the midst of having our kids, we actually have experienced 15 miscarriages. And so our last miscarriage actually happened about 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the course of I got married 6 weeks after I turned 18.
Wow.
And so we actually found out we were pregnant. We got married in August. We found out we were pregnant the following February. Mm-hmm. And we had a beautiful pregnancy, a really incredible birth. And, I was 19. Mm-hmm. You're a first time mom and you're like, yeah, this is interesting. And so when I was 4 months postpartum, we found out we were pregnant again.
Wow.
And I was devastated. I thought I believed that life began at conception, but here I was 4 months postpartum, still in this not sleeping stupor. Yeah. And surprise, you're having another one. We already don't know what we're doing.
Right.
And so, and this is funny, I remember calling my grandmother crying, and I was like, what am I going to do? I don't know how this happened. She said, well, baby, do you sleep with a man?
Yeah.
It's like, oh gosh.
That's how your grandma says it.
So precious. Thank you so much for that encouragement. And so we, when I was 11 weeks pregnant with, it was a little girl. When I was 11 weeks pregnant with her, we lost her. And it was a very wham bam, thank you ma'am kind of thing with the first doctor, where the doctor said, hey, we have no heartbeat, let's schedule a DNC for in the morning. And walked out. And I was in shock. Nobody I ever knew, miscarriage was not even on my radar. I was literally holding my infant.
Oh my gosh.
By that time I was 6 months or 5 months, postpartum with her. And it was just like a door had been slammed in my face. Mm-hmm. And so I went to a friend's house, the next day, or maybe it was later that day. And I remember going and sitting on her couch, and she had 3 little ones at the time that were roughly my kid's age. And she was just the most calming presence. And she had, and this is just one of the ways that the Lord has shown up for me, so I'm going to share this. She had on her refrigerator the card of a local OBGYN. And I sat on her couch holding my baby and sobbed because I just could not comprehend what was happening. And the doctor was so cold. It was
Mhm.
just, oh, this happens a lot. It's really not a big deal. Doesn't mean you can't have babies. See you later. We'll see you in the morning. And my first thought was like, okay, we've done one ultrasound. Like, how do you know? How
Yeah.
do you know that you know? And we want to do a surgery to remove it. And
Mhm.
so I sat on her couch and I was like, one, I don't know. I don't understand what's even happening. And two, I'm not really convinced. So what if we go in the morning with no more confirmation and we abort a healthy baby? Like, that was my biggest fear. And and she had on her refrigerator, just magneted to the fridge, the card of a local OBGYN that she had been looking for a new one, and a friend had given her this card. She hadn't called. She just stuck it up on the fridge. And she said, "You know what? I have a friend who really likes this guy. Why don't you call and see if he can fit you in?" And so I called this office. It was like 5 minutes before they closed, and I
Mhm.
was sobbing,
Yeah.
and I could not keep it together. And I said, "I'm so sorry. This is what's happened. They said I'm having a miscarriage, but I have no signs, and they want to do D&C in the morning. And I'm just looking for someone to give me another opinion."
Mhm.
And she said, "Hold on just a second." And she went and she called me back and she said, "Okay, the doctor will see you if you'll be here at 8 o'clock in the morning. He has C-sections all day, but he'll come in early to see you before he
Mm.
goes to the hospital." And so that doctor sat with me for like 3 more weeks doing test after test until I was convinced,
Mm.
before he started pushing, like, "Okay, we're getting to a level where maybe it's not so safe for the baby to still be in there." And so, but he was so kind. His wife had been through it. He was so
Mhm.
kind, and it was my first loss.
Mhm.
And that was such a launching point for me, just in, same pregnancy, same loss, but the way that two different people handled it, two
Yeah.
different medical professionals, but one who was a very cold, like, "Sorry this happened, but, you'll get over it," kind of thing,
Mhm.
versus someone who sat with us. He came in before the surgery and prayed with us.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
he was there. He called us afterward. Like, it was a really big deal to me in seeing, okay, and now it feels kind of prophetic. It's like,
Mm.
this is how some people handle it, but this is how we're going to learn to handle grief for other people. And
Mm.
I'm so grateful for that at this point. But at this point, we've had 4 live births, beautiful, healthy pregnancies and children. Everything went perfect. My last 2, I had them at home. Um, but you know, pregnancy loss happens not
Mhm.
to 1 in 4 women, but of 1 in 4 pregnancies, and that's
Mhm.
clinically confirmed.
Yeah.
So those that are not clinically confirmed, the number is probably higher. But with it being so common, and with me having had as many losses as I've had,
Mm.
we've had 15, and one of those is a set of twins. We've actually lost 16 babies.
Wow.
And so for me, that those losses and the way they were handled, and then a very traumatic birth led me into home birth.
Mhm.
Okay. And so when I had my third, it was just a very peaceful, very redemptive birth. It
Mhm.
was so beautiful, so peaceful. And I said, "Oh my goodness, I think that more women should know that this is actually a thing. We can enjoy birth. What in the world?" And so I started working as a birth doula. And just a couple of months into working as a birth doula, um, I had a client who had a loss. And
Mm.
now, when you've had as many as I've had, you unintentionally become what is the worst kind of guru that you can probably think of,
Yeah.
where people are calling and they're like, "Okay, I'm experiencing this, or a friend is experiencing this. Like,
Mhm.
what do I do now?"
Mhm.
And so I had kind of just unintentionally coached people through it multiple times. But when I became a birth doula and I saw just the power of a redemptive birth,
Mhm.
and then I saw the absence of that peaceful birth for babies who were no longer alive. And I
Mm.
said, "Okay, we got to change this. Like,
Mhm.
we've I don't have a clue how I could make this helpful for everyone, but for the women within my reach,
Yeah.
I can make this as it's never going to be a happy experience, but I
No.
can try to make this as, I don't even know what it is, as little trauma as I can. Like, I
Mm.
can try to help ease that
Yeah.
burden and ease that pain and ease that trauma. And that is just, kind of organically came about. It was
Mm.
never an intention. It was never something where I was like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. Because who wants to do
Well, just to speak to that trauma piece of this, and this is a trauma that many, many women have experienced and that we don't
that? Yeah.
address well in our culture.
Hmm.
But what we know about trauma is not that something bad happened to you, but it's how you were cared for and how the meaning that you made of that bad thing that happened to you
Yeah.
in the immediate after effects of.
Yes.
So for you to come alongside a woman and say, this bad thing is happening, I can't prevent it. I can't change anything about like bringing this baby out alive, you know,
Right.
but
Yeah.
what I can do is come alongside you and provide you with the emotional support, the knowledge, the even like the commiseration, like the companionship of, I know how hard this is, and you're going to get through this, and God is going to redeem this on the other side.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something, it's very interesting how individual it is,
Mhm.
because again, speaking to what you just said, where it's, the way that it is addressed, the way that it is handled, the way that people either come beside you or they don't, the way that people say, okay, yes, this is happening and I'm sorry, or people say, oh, well, sucks to suck, but like you'll get
Mhm.
over it.
Mhm.
And that's such a common thing. And for me, being a Christian, it is something that, like, I see two different worlds. Like, I see the culture of the world, and then I see the culture of grief also in the church. And it's very, very interesting to me that there doesn't seem to be a lot of separation there.
Mhm.
And I think that that's where I have felt so called to come into that, is that we should come alongside people in their grief differently
Yeah.
than people in the world come beside people in their grief. We should be bringing them to the feet of Jesus. Whereas
Mhm.
people who are outside of that and don't have people who know Christ, they
Mhm.
have nothing, they've got nowhere to take them. They have nothing to offer, but we do.
Mhm.
And so you can look in the way that Jesus grieved with people
Mm.
as, I think, the biggest way to see how to address the, like the way that the trauma and the traumatic event is unfolding.
Mhm.
If we look at Jesus in, let's look at Jesus with the woman at the well. Okay. She wasn't necessarily grieving. She was living, a life that was probably not her best life.
Yeah.
Right. But what is the first thing that Jesus did? He showed his humanity. Hey, give me some water.
Mm.
He didn't go to her and say, oh gosh, you know what? You're on your fifth husband. That really sucks. Like, that is stinky cheese. He
Mhm.
said, hey, like, I need something too. Like, I am, and Jesus, he showed his humanity, He didn't show up with his divinity,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of times in the church, we come in with this almost, we come in wanting to be real churchy,
Mhm.
you know, but I ask this question a lot, to like church leaders and stuff, is if you're walking out by the ocean, okay, it's a peaceful morning, you're looking out over the ocean, and you see something over to the side, and it just kind of breaks your gaze from the sunrise. Okay.
Mm.
And you look over and there's a woman, and you see her. She's very silent, but she's bobbing up and down. She's drowning. She's drowning. Do you take the steps to go out in the water with her, or do you look at her and you say, I'll pray for you and hope it saves her?
Hope you
And it
don't
sounds,
drown.
yes, and it sounds so dramatic, but the truth is that if we're not willing to show our humanity and get dirty and get in that with them,
Mhm.
then we run the risk of them laying in the muck for their whole lives.
Yeah.
Like, you're holding a water hose, wash them off.
Mm. Well, I think what's really important in what you're saying, we want to point people to Jesus when they're in grief because Jesus, like you said, shares our humanity, is our comforter. But we don't want to do that by just saying, well, here's a Bible verse. You shouldn't
Yes.
worry. Or we know he's
Yes.
in a better place. Or, we know
Yes.
God has a purpose in all of your trials. Like those are not actually comforting statements. It's much
Not in that moment, they're not. Like
better.
there's a time and a place for them, but the immediate aftermath is not like we're the truth is that when we have these losses, and it's any loss, but this loss in particular, it's such a lonely loss,
Mhm,
right? Like, and grief as a whole is a lonely place to be.
mhm,
Okay. But when we're talking about miscarriage, we're talking about pregnancy loss, especially when it's in the earlier stages, a lot of times I am the only person who ever held my baby.
knew about your baby.
A lot of times I am the only well, I'm not me, but like a lot of women, they are the only ones who even knew that that baby existed.
Yeah.
And so the loneliness of that, when you're not only telling people I lost something, but you're having to convince them that the thing
Mhm,
existed for you to
mhm,
lose,
mhm,
right? Like, hey, I was pregnant and now I'm not.
mhm.
I was pregnant and my baby died.
Yeah,
To them, your baby never lived.
yeah.
And as the church, and this is kind of a controversial thing right here that I say a lot, is this has really shown me so much who truly believes that life begins at conception,
Mm,
and we're not going down that road, but there's a lot of gray area there in the church that you don't see or that you don't think of when it comes to pregnancy loss, because I cannot tell you how many times I've had Christians and the thing is that they're all well meaning. No one
mhm,
is setting out to intentionally hurt or injure. But in instances of a blighted ovum, a blighted ovum is a pregnancy where the entire pregnancy develops except for the embryo, like
mm,
the actual body of the baby.
mm,
But what point did that stop?
mm,
You know, just because it's microscopic doesn't mean that it didn't exist. The fact that sperm and egg met indicates conception. That indicates life. And so I've had three blighted ovums. And what I experienced in that was, oh, well, at least there was no baby.
mm,
And my questions there become, one, well, it answers a lot of questions about what we believe about life beginning at conception. But aside from that, if we were to completely sidestep that, this woman in her heart
mhm,
grew a baby,
mhm,
and all three of mine, the pregnancy ended around 8 or 9 weeks.
mm,
I found out I was pregnant at 4 weeks.
mhm.
Do you have any idea how much of their life you plan out
In
in
those
just a
4
few
weeks.
short weeks?
Mhm,
And it's not a loss of a blood. So it's never just, oh, it's a blighted ovum. It's fine.
mm,
Like they are grieving the loss of the child that should have been, because no matter if the baby's body grew to a point you could see whether it
mm,
stopped growing, like in a microscopic state,
mhm.
that life still existed.
Yeah,
And that life, though it was not real to you, it was extremely real to her.
that mom.
And so the grief does not change. It's never made anybody feel, well, I can't talk in absolutes. It probably is very uncommon. I can tell you this, it never made me feel better for someone to say, oh, well, at least there was no
Wasn't
baby.
a real baby.
Because, when I am going through a very real labor process of losing that,
Mhm,
I would differ from you in that opinion.
yeah,
And so part of what I want to do is just be alongside women in this
mm,
and teach people how to be alongside women in this, because
mhm,
it's so personal. Each woman is going to grieve differently. Some women don't grieve. One of the things I found that I had to deal with, that and it was very surprising even to me, was that I have a friend who I had been their doula for their first baby, and then they had, gone it alone, had a fantastic second birth, and then they were pregnant again with the third baby, and she had called and said, "Hey, surprise, we're having another baby. Would you be my doula?" And I said, "Of course I would." Um, and just a few weeks later, she just texted me and she was like, "Oh, hey, you know what? Never mind. Don't need a doula."
Hmm.
And, of course, red flags like, woo, woo. And I was like,
Yeah.
"What? Like, what's going on? Everything okay?" And she was like, "Yeah, well, we had a miscarriage." And I was like, "Okay, like, let's go a little bit deeper here."
Hmm.
And she was fine.
Hmm.
She was like, "We really weren't ready for another baby. It wasn't a good time. And so we're really not devastated."
Hmm.
And I had to fight the anger.
Hmm.
I mean, I felt like I had been stabbed in the eye.
Yeah.
And it's so,
You were
but it goes
grieving
to,
for her, right?
yes,
Oh my
yes,
gosh.
and it was so, it was very surprising to me the way that, and I don't enjoy the word triggered, but the way that it triggered me, it was like, if she's fine, what's wrong with me? Like, why am
Mhm.
I not fine?
Yeah.
Because I was so angry. And so, but that showed to me, one, that it's very different. And the way that we approach the grief has to be individualized to the woman,
Mhm. Yep.
right? Um, but also, it showed me some stuff in myself where I was like, okay, that's not healed. Like,
Mhm.
that's not, like, you're going to have to rein that in before you want to stab somebody in the eye.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think like just in general, grief is not just this one thing. Like grief is not just somebody died and now I feel sad. You know,
Yeah.
grief can be the loss of a dream, the loss of a relationship, the loss of I thought my life was going to be this way and now it's not that way, or
Yes.
the opportunity to pursue a career that you thought you wanted, or the opportunity for like a health problem can cause grief in your body,
Yes.
any of those. So it's not just like it was a real baby and the real baby died and so then obviously you're going to grieve, but it is like that loss of the dream of the person that you were imagining in your heart
Yes.
found out when the pregnancy
Yes.
test had the 2 lines, you know?
Yes. And that is something that is so, that's something that's so important for me to, like, to speak about, to speak on, is because we will never understand everyone's grief, right? There are people, and I could not tell you how thankful I am that there are women who will never, so many women who will never experience what I've women there, or what I've experienced. There's so many women who they get pregnant and they are excited and then they have a baby and that is it. Like,
Yeah,
that is their story,
yeah.
And
Well,
I would
let
love for
me
that to
just
be mine.
yeah, like my story is different from yours in that I haven't had any miscarriages. I had 3 healthy births, and
That's
but
wonderful.
what's different about my story is that when I was 19, I was diagnosed with PCOS. And at
Mm,
that time, they told me that it's very unlikely that you will be able to get pregnant. And if you do, it's very likely that you will have a miscarriage. And so at 19, thinking like, and I wasn't married yet, I wasn't wanting to have kids yet, I wanted to finish up
mhm.
schooling and all of that. But I grieved at that point the loss of future children that I knew I wanted.
Yes.
And at that time, my sister was, she was 17. She's 2 years younger than me. And she sent me a care package and said, I'll have babies for you. And what turned out to happen is that she had the most awful pregnancies in the world, throwing up
Oh,
16 times
bless
a
her.
day and, having other complications. And then God just gifted me these 3 great healthy pregnancies that were no big deal. And
Yes.
so you don't like, you just don't know. Like I anticipated grief and I grieved like at that like early adulthood for what I thought was the loss of a
Yes.
dream. And God turned the story around. You just like you don't
Yes.
know.
Yes. And it's so, you'll find a lot of women who have a hard time getting over the envy of that, like the envy of other women getting, and it was taken from me very, very early. But and something you said really made me think, where you talked about grieving the future and the children that you should have had. And that it just kind of brought this out, and I'm gonna work on saying this without crying, because I think that it needs to be said.
Okay.
3 weeks ago, well, because we were supposed to be recording. 3 weeks ago, we had our 15th miscarriage. It was a very long and crazy month and a half. So at first, we were told, you have a very unpregnant uterus. Everything looks perfectly not pregnant.
Okay.
And then but my HCG levels were rising. And so then we were told, okay, like, we're coming up on 8 weeks now. We're dealing with an ectopic pregnancy, and we've got to do something now. Like, we either have to start methotrexate or, which, just for people who do not know what that is, it's the medicine that empties your body of pregnancy. Or we need to do an exploratory surgery and try and find the baby and then remove the baby. And so, one of the griefs that people deal with in ectopic pregnancy is something that I don't think it's talked about a lot, is that when you are having an ectopic pregnancy, you have a healthy pregnancy growing. It's just growing somewhere that's not in your uterus.
Yeah.
And so when you have to make that decision, you have to make the decision to kill the baby to save your life.
Yep.
But if you don't, it'll kill you both.
Yep.
And so, that's a really hard place to be. And I found myself like just beside myself, like, how do I make this decision? And so we had that appointment on Monday. The day before, we decided we were going to go to the emergency room. Just, we couldn't get in with another OB on such short notice. And I really, I'm the queen of second opinions when it comes to doctors or anybody. I'm like, we're going to put another set of eyes on this. I just feel like you can never have too many people looking at it. And so I was wrong, by the way. We went to the emergency room, and we were told by that doctor, we have a very healthy pregnancy in your uterus. We have a fetal pulse. We have everything. We just don't have a heartbeat. And, it's still early enough that maybe we won't. Or maybe it's just early that we don't have it right now. And so we rejoiced. We were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so a week later, we had our regular doctor's appointment. I went to a different OB that I had used before. When we got in there, they were like, this is a blighted ovum. This is not going to grow like this, that you're going to miscarry. And all of this to say, this last miscarriage has been an experience that I haven't been before. Whereas in all of our losses before, there was always I've had healthy pregnancies. There's always this hope in me. We're like, okay, we can have more, right? And I'm the crazy person that at 5 kids, I'm like, let's learn more. Sure. I'm drowning, but I can hold a baby. and so, the difference here, which, at this point I can say, I don't think I'll ever be like, if I had to do all of this again, I'd do it all again. But this was an experience that now I am able to empathize in a different way. Whereas now, my husband and I have had the conversation of I can't do this anymore. I wanted another baby, but I can't do this anymore. I can't continue to do this emotionally, physically. Holy moly, my body it has been through it, so emotionally, physically, our kids, it's I can't do this anymore. And so right now, for me, it's not just grieving the loss of the baby, but grieving the loss of the future that I thought that we had.
Yep.
And I think that, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think it's a really important place for women, because every woman's going to be there different. Not every woman's going to go 15 pregnancy losses before they call it quits.
Right.
I know women who've had 2 or 3 and they were like, no more. We're not doing
too hard.
And I never could understand that.
Mm.
Like, I was like, like, but you could have you could have a baby. And so here we are where we're in a different place of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I see it now. Like, I see this grief over the babies that I wanted that made, like I never wanted kids growing up. I
Mm.
didn't want kids. I didn't think I would get married. And then bam, I was the first one of anybody we knew who got married. And, it just kind of took me well, I mean, at 18, it took everybody by surprise.
Yeah.
But, like I didn't dream of my wedding. I didn't dream like my whole life of having kids. And then, I got married and I was like, this man, I will make 7 million of you. Like, just like, I will have so many of your babies.
That's
And so getting to the point now where it's like, I understand now how she felt, how those women felt when they weren't just grieving the loss of the baby, they're grieving the loss of a future, and now having to reframe their mind
mm-hmm.
to say, okay, now where's the hope? Like the hope in the one future, I saw it.
Yeah.
But now that I don't feel that hope anymore,
Mm-hmm.
like, you're kind of walking into the darkness there and saying, okay, Lord, like, I am trusting you to light this up. Like, I'm trusting you to show me, like, if that's not the path that we're walking,
Mm-hmm.
show me the path you want me to walk.
Right.
And for me, that has been this with the Christian Miscarriage Company.
Yeah. Well, this is first mention that you've had of it. So let's talk about the Christian Miscarriage Company and what you're doing to try to bring some hope and peace to other women.
Okay. So the Christian Miscarriage Company clearly has been born out of my grief and out of my experiences of the support and lack of support in the church, more specifically.
Yeah.
So what my goals are with the Christian Miscarriage Company are kind of twofold. One is to really come alongside women who are experiencing miscarriage and pregnancy loss and say, okay, like, here is a place where you can go when you feel like no one else understands. I do. I've been here. I've been here so many different times and in so many different mental spaces.
Yeah.
Like,
Circumstances.
I've been there. And, so the big thing for those women that we're doing with launching the Christian Miscarriage Company is one, being a place everybody in this day and age when we need to zone out, what do? We take out our phones. So, being on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, those kind of things with just, 5 seconds of encouragement makes a lot of difference. It really does. And, you can go a lot of places and learn about miscarriage, but there are not a lot of places you can go and learn about miscarriage in light of what the word says about who you are in Christ. Yeah. And that's a really big deal for me. Because had it not been for my husband and my husband's faith through all of this, I genuinely don't know what I would be doing right now. And so many women don't have that. Mm-hmm. And so one of the other things, or the only other thing with the Christian Miscarriage Company, so we have that aspect of really coming in and encouraging women. But then in August, I'm actually launching a church course, a training for churches on how to come alongside women in grief who are experiencing miscarriage. I could broaden it and go just grief in general, but I think, the big deal for me is in the church, grief is, well, in the world in general, but especially in the church, grief is uncomfortable. Right? We slap a smile on Sunday morning. We scream at our spouses and our kids all the way to the car. And then we're like, all right, straighten up your tie and pull your pants up because we're going in happy, And so we have this like facade of happiness going into the church. And because of that, no one knows how to get in the uncomfortable. Nobody knows how to deal with grief. So this training course that we're launching in August is actually going to be something that comes in and says, okay, here's how to get down in the dirty. Here's how to create a ministry team in your church whose job, like when someone gets that text, hey, Susie lost the baby, or hey, pray for me for losing the baby, that they know, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to come alongside and support this family not from a standpoint of counseling, but from a standpoint of biblical hospitality.
Mm.
And so with that, I am not a counselor. I would probably make a terrible counselor, but what I'm really good at? I'm really good at feeding people.
Yeah.
And I'm really good at getting down where people are, because I have experienced, grief and loss in so many different areas of my life. But this one, it's so important to train churches on the nuances of pregnancy, loss, and miscarriage, right? So that they can say, okay, she's hurting and she's grieving. Let's send her a Bible verse. No, no, no. Hold on a second. And feeding people is great, but that is one of the ways that we're going to come along this family and support them. So we're kind of twofold in that, with supporting the women. I actually I just published a book.
Yeah.
So it'll be available on Amazon June 1st in paperback. It's actually available for pre-order now on ebooks. But this book for me was something that ran the gamut of both of those sides. So the book is called The Words I Could Not Say, Musings of a Miscarriage Mama. And this book is actually just a collection of things that I wrote, like poems, journal entries, thoughts that I had over the course of having all of these losses. And so with that, it serves two purposes. One, when women read this who have experienced loss, but they didn't have a way to frame it. They didn't, they have these thoughts and these feelings, and they seem so ridiculous and they're so overwhelming, and nobody else seems to have a clue what we feel or what we need. When they read that, my hope is that they will read it and say, yes, I've been there. Yes, I felt that. And oh my goodness, I had no idea how to put it in words, but here it is. And there's something, I actually ended up publishing it because I read something on the internet about miscarriage. And, oh, you know what it was? It was by a girl called, let's see, her Instagram is The Miscarriage Doula. Okay. And it was just a little blurb, and it said, recurrent pregnancy loss made me feel like the girl who cried pregnancy.
Yeah.
And that resonated so much with me. It was like, okay, I've always felt that way, but I had no way of putting it into words. Like, I knew that I felt that way, but I didn't know that was what it was. So putting a label on that was like, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I was just scrolling TikTok on the couch, And so, but anyway, for my book, The Words I Could Not Say, that's my goal in that with those women, is that they would see that and they would say, okay, thank you, Lord, for putting something into my hands where I know that someone understands me. Feeling seen. But then on the other side, support people, churches, people who, don't know that at some point miscarriage will touch everyone's lives. If, your friend, your sister, your somebody. And for people who are reading it that are never going to experience that, for them to see it and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea that you felt that way. But now that I understand a little bit about what's behind that curtain, let's pull that curtain to the side. Like, let me in. Because now I have a better idea. And that is really kind of my main goal with that. But with the Christian Miscarriage Company as a whole, is that, to reach as many people as I can who have experienced pregnancy loss, and then teaching the church how to come alongside them and say, I got you. Like, we're in this together, but you're not going to drown. And that's the whole of it.
Right. So what's available right now is, like your social media presence,
Yes.
getting those small bites of encouragement. And then what's coming next?
Yes. So I am on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, the Christian Miscarriage Company. So next, let's see, June 1st is actually the availability of the paperback for The Words I Could Not Say. It's available now on Amazon pre-order. Next, actually, in I don't even know what today is. In the next couple of weeks, May, May, May 1st, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. May 1st, I should have the final approval on a miscarriage devotional journal that'll be releasing July 1st.
Okay.
So we'll have June 1st is going to be the words I could not say. July 1st will be a miscarriage devotional journal. So the goal in that is just really leading women to the feet of Jesus and saying, okay, like here's something that you can go through every day that's just a little bit. It is not a Bible study. It is truly a devotional journal. So we go in and say, okay, here is our verse for the day.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about this a little bit. Let's talk about how this applies to our lives. Let's talk about where we are in the muck right now. And let's find the light in this. And then here's a journal prompt. I want you to take what we learned and take this journal prompt, and we're going to write out how this applies to our lives. We're going to see it in the Word. Mm-hmm. We're going to learn about it in the passages. You know, there's so much of me poured into those passages, just, you know, that camaraderie, that, you know, like I've been there, girlfriend kind of thing in the passages. So we start with the Lord, and then we bring that in with, okay, I've been there, and here's what the Lord showed me in my grief. Mm-hmm. And then here's what we're going to do to make sure that we know how this is applying in our lives today, and write that out.
Okay. And then the course for churches is August. So you got June,
1st.
July, August. Do you have a name for the course yet?
No. So if anybody has some suggestions.
Okay. Okay, I'll be thinking about that.
And that's the only thing I don't know.
Where I'm assuming people could follow you on social media if they want to be like alerted when that's available, right?
Yes. So actually we are finishing up the website. I'm so grateful to be doing this with you right now, because we really are in the initial launch phases of this. So June 1st, maybe before, but my official date, wink, wink, is June 1st for our website to be finally up and live. You know, we're waiting on, I have to have the links to the things that I need for the website and stuff. So that'll be available as soon as the website's available. We'll have the availability to sign up for email alert and such, but there's going to be all of the updating will be done on social media as well.
Okay. Well, I'm going to link all of what is available now in the show notes so people can start following along, and then they can be alerted when new stuff comes out and they can see what you're doing. And especially I think if they have somebody in their life that, you know, maybe has gone through this, will go through this, it's just a good thing to have like in your back pocket to know that there's encouragement out there when you're going through this very private kind of loss.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So let me ask you my question that I ask all the guests. What are you doing for soul care?
Oh, goodness. That's a good question. I think the biggest thing for soul care is really, and it's, you know, it's so cliche, spending a lot of time in the Word. Mm-hmm. And now a lot of time, it looks a lot different than a lot of time for people who don't have 5 kids.
5 kids.
You know, so for me, you know, like in the mornings while I'm drinking my coffee, there's always a baby in my lap. So, mm-hmm. you know, we're reading, and I've really been right now in where I am and being so fresh off of these, I've really been diving in where Jesus grieves people, or where Jesus meets people in their grief. You know, so in grief, in loss, you know, just the restoration there. And, you know, I've been spending a lot of time in John chapter 4 with the mm-hmm. Samaritan woman at the well. I've been spending a lot of time where he's healing the blind man. You know, things like that are they're so refreshing to me. Mm-hmm. You know, but another thing that is soul care that I've been working really, really hard on is just doing nothing.
That's hard.
You know, like as I'm an overachiever, and I feel like I need to always be doing something to be productive. Mm-hmm. And so something the Lord's really been working with me on is like, okay, in order to be productive, you actually have to stop. Yep. Like in order to have the energy to keep going, mm-hmm. you have to stop. You cannot operate in this mental space in the same capacity you always have been. So stop. Mm-hmm. slow down, let me fill your cup, and then you can go from there. So those are really the big things in hot baths. I'm a
Oh,
hot bath queen.
right. With no little people like knocking on the
With
door, Mama.
listen, there are 2 doors that lock between me and them.
Okay, got it.
And the others are old enough. I'm like, y'all throw crackers on the ground. I don't even care. Like, you guys, you're going to be fine. I'll
Yeah.
be back in 45 minutes.
Yeah, there you go. Well, good for you. Well, as I said, I'll have all of the links for everybody in the show notes. They can follow along with everything that you're creating and the ways that you're bringing hope to people. And I just want to thank you so much for being vulnerable with your story to share with me and our listeners and the people who will read the book and all of that. And I'm just, grateful to God that He's working through your life.
Thank you so much for having me. I've so enjoyed it.
The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.